happiness, comfort, companionship, a sense of and a sense of equality, perhaps. That really, to me, is the bedrock of marriage. All the other things like fidelity and procreating and all that is peripheral to the core definition.
So this notion of equality is very important, which has always, been troublesome. Nandini, what do you feel when you were talking to those people or friends? One, I'd like to ask you, does love have anything to do with marriage when it comes up? I mean, is love still there, or we dream about it? And the other is this whole, what he brought up, equality. Like for instance, we were saying that if you want to share what you're doing and what you think are your rights, like we want to stay at home, and it's not you're a doormat. These changing notions and expectations in your research and with your friends, what do you feel?
In my case, since we were speaking about arranged marriage specifically, the idea of love and marriage didn't come so much into the picture. It was sort of...
At all?
No, you tend to fall in love after marriage, or you've decided that, what you want is a certain kind of domesticity, and the spouse you're looking for is someone who fits into your idea of that life. But when it comes to love, or when it comes to dating, I think the difference between dating somebody or being in a serious relationship and being in a marriage is that you stop being grateful for little things that the other person does. For instance, when I go back, if my boyfriend, after a long day at work, were to come pick me up from the airport, it would be the sweetest thing in the world. But if my husband were to pick me up, it would be what I expected of him. And if he weren't to pick me up, he'd be the bastard who couldn't come to pick up his wife from the airport. So I think that's one of the problems. And again, once you're married, you acquire a family. So you can't skip weddings in the other family, because then it's assumed that you both are fighting, whereas you may just have work to do. So I think that's the difference. With equality, I think that in our generation and among the sort of urban elite, I think that comes most into play when you have children, and then you have to look at gender roles and, who stays up when, and, I think some men have a fair point in saying you get to take 3 months off, and so you can stay up the nights and go to sleep during the day. Someone can come to help out. Whereas there's this guy who has at the most 10 days off for paternity leave. Most companies don't have a paternity leave policy. And, so sharing time and things like that become weird. Or it becomes like, okay, so you're staying at home to look after the baby. Why aren't you making my dinner also? So I think gender roles become a little more complex when babies come into the picture. I don't know. I mean, I'm not married, so I wouldn't know if that happens with marriage also.
Yeah, well, they say traditionally you marry the family. You don't marry the other person. Now, is that changing because people have, smaller houses, so family is not usually there. But when it comes to looking after the children, it was very good to have a grandmother or somebody, doing it for you. So what would you feel about family in this coming in? Does it affect, is it an obstacle in marriage?
Well, in my case, certainly, because we've always lived as a nuclear unit, so these kind of factors don't really come into play. My wife and I decided when we met 18 years ago that we would not work together because there's a fundamental inequality in a director-actor relationship. And I think that was the wisest decision we made, and probably a great reason for this, success of the marriage is that you don't tell each other what to do. So these things probably help, but as far as the other aspects of, it never occurred to me as to ever ask her to change her name or take my name. When we got married, it was completely understood that she would retain her name because that's her name. There are certain communities where they even change the first name. The girl changes the first name. So there's a complete subversion of identity at one level.
Yeah, and you're not even allowed to sometimes see the family where you come from. You completely, subsume all that. Yes. What about, in things are changing, obviously, but this doing things together. You see, marriage is also hit roadblocks when, okay, you're going to cook, you're going to wash, and domestic stuff is drudgery or prison. But what if you don't look at it like that? You enjoy cooking together. Can you bring romance into domestic chores? Yeah? Or whoever.
So, in the story in my book with Baji Rao and Gayatri Bai, there is that kind of relationship. You know, they know what their roles are. They know, you know, she helps him in the fields, and he has that sort of intrinsic respect for her decision making, and they talk about things before and all of that. And eventually, when she emerges as a leader in her village, he is actually really very supportive and proud of her. So I think there are shifting, you know, if you have a basic core that supports each other and that is loving and respectful of each other, yes, you know, you can shift these roles. I think you may enjoy playing that, and you might enjoy, there is a certain romance to, you know, the husband comes home and you serve a meal, and, you know, the children and everything. So if people find that romantic, that's great. That's a great marriage, right? And if other people don't find it romantic, it's not a great marriage. If they're finding it drudgery, then it's not a great marriage. And I wouldn't call it a marriage just because it exists on paper, right? This notion of happily married. Well, then you're unhappily married. We tend to throw that word, they're happily married. And I ask, you know, how do you know they're happily married, right? So I think what we need today is alternatives. So you have the marriage plot, right? That's one thing. If you have alternatives outside that, I think love is much more possible if you have alternatives. And I do believe that love is more important than marriage. And I'm not just talking about romantic love. I believe in the true, like, supporting each other kind of love. I do believe that it doesn't need marriage for it to happen.
Well, actually, notions of love are also changing. If any of you would like to talk about love, or how it contributes to a marriage or not, because we were also looking at, you know, is marriage an entrapment, or is love really essential for a marriage? Is there something beyond love? I mean, we go into the larger things of love. Where does selflessness come in? So, any of you would like to?
By love, do you also mean physical love, physical attraction?
No, we'll get to that later.
Okay, so
we
just
must get to that later. Yes, of course.
Okay. No, because like when I was speaking to people about their marriages, their arranged marriages, now these were not societies where the groom and the bride were not allowed to meet, so they met fairly often. So especially after the engagement, it became like a regular relationship. They would meet every day and go out every day. So I think at one point they had started caring for each other even before the marriage. And I think there's also a sense of closeness when you know that you are going to marry this person for sure. I think the man becomes more protective, the wife becomes more coy maybe. So when you spoke about domestic chores, one of my interviewees did tell me that, you know, she started to enjoy packing a dabba in the first few weeks after marriage. And she was a journalist who would work from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. And he was a banker who would work from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So in order to meet and talk, one of them had to wake up for the other and another had to stay up for the other. So, I mean, and they did that, and then they'd go back to sleep, or, you know, like, she would ring the bell when she came back, not take a key, so that he would wake up, come down, and they would talk, and he wanted to do that. So I think that's how you can bring in romance. So love and marriage, yeah, they do coexist.
Yeah, taking off from a session yesterday, what about food and love? I mean, there was Lunchbox, some of you may have seen it. You can say a lot through food. I mean, a man cooking too. How important is food? Because there are so many cases you read, you know, those columns on the side. She didn't give him a warm roti, he slapped her, he killed her. Food becomes very important in a very negative way and in a very positive way. So what do you feel about food and love in that sense?
Well, you have to take one look at me to know what I feel about food. So it's not a problem. No, and ironically, my wife and I both foodies. We both write on food and travel and wine. So clearly, that your talking about things very close to our hearts and guts.
Well, yeah, heart, stomach, food.
I'd like to add something to that. So with food, I think that's a, when it's a chore, it's a different thing. So in my case, both my ex-husbands were excellent cooks, and they were the ones that were the primary people that were cooking. I enjoy cooking for large, like friends and a larger group. I don't like the day-to-day thing. So I'm beginning to sound terrible right now, I think. But I think food really comes in with children. For me, after having my son, just feeding him, there's some joy to that. He liked his father's cooking and his stepfather's cooking far more than he liked mine. He's gone to college now, and he says, I keep asking, do you miss your mother's cooking? And he says, not really. But I know I got a lot of joy out of cooking for him, and I think there's something about sitting around a family table. So I would say that that's something I miss about a marriage, like something about sitting around a table as a family. So I think the family aspect of that is something that I miss. I know that we used to do that when we were children, and that was really beautiful and good memories for me. Luckily, because I live in the United States, the mother and child unit is also referred to as a family. So, but it took me a while to say our family will be coming when I was just talking about me and my son, But I love that they're insisting that every kind of family, there are different kinds of families, and that they should be considered a family. So we would sit down to a family dinner. It was my son and me. And he loves to cook now, and he's really grown up. There was an earlier session about patriarchy and raising boys, and Eve Ensler and all these people were talking about it. And I do think that I've raised a very loving boy who really, really thinks from his heart and has far more of an open idea of women and really loves people and women.
Well, a bone of contention, maybe it's changing. A lot of people are eating out or ordering in, but my mother made it like that. It's always my mother, mother may have been a really bad cook, but it is that thing of mother. Now, I'm just wondering, in marriage, does the wife, in a way, have to fill that, the mother's role? How much of it is that? Of course, food is one way, but a lot of other things, that caring. So who would, Nandan?
Well, I think when you speak about nuclear units and you say, okay, I don't want to be encumbered by my in-laws or my parents or whatever, and then you move out, and then you suddenly realize that there's no one to cook for you. Either you hire a cook who will come in and then one of you has to stay up or, sort out her problems and whatever, or you have to figure out a way to cook for yourself. And I think that's one of the biggest surprises, that you suddenly walk in and you're like, okay, now I have to cook for another person, because many of us have lived alone. So I think, and I think with the whole idea of nurturer, the wife as nurturer, I think that is largely prevalent. And I don't know if our films have reinforced it, but I don't know whether it's instinctive. For me, it's when my mother is out of town, for instance, even when I was in my teens, my younger brothers would come to me when they needed help with anything, with food or whatever. It wouldn't occur to them to ask my father. So I think it's an instinctive role that women take. And I think it's also, we speak about how we turn into our mothers at some point. So I wonder whether that's something we enjoy also, pampering our husbands or boyfriends or whatever it is. So I think that's debatable. But with food, the other thing is, I was just thinking of instances in literature of, like Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, where this rejected sister, so everything she cooks tastes bitter and whatever, because all her emotions go into it. So I don't know. I mean, I think food does become an important aspect of any relationship. And I mean, so often there's this whole thing of, oh, I like your food because you put so much love into it or whatever. I think you just probably care a little more about the ingredients that go in when you like somebody.
But also, I think, it's interesting how if advertising is a benchmark of holding a mirror up to society and probably even sometimes shaping societal trends, or where you have men cooking, maybe it's a Sunday, and you use that thing of the all-round, Renaissance man who not only, brings home the bacon, but he also rustles up a meal, which is wonderful. I think that at least if that these subliminal messages that go out shape society and marriages. And
Fahad, you're a keen observer of society, high society, other societies. You also have marriage of convenience. Are we seeing more of that? And a question after that to you too is high life and celebrity and film stars and marriage. What happens? I mean, what they play in movies is very different from their lives. If you could talk a little bit about this area, yes.
Sure, but I think that, marriages of convenience have existed from time immemorial. I mean, strategic alliances, entire kingdoms and fiefdoms are traded through with that. So
staying in a marriage.
Staying in a marriage,
not arranged marriages. Yes.
The trick is to have a harem immediately, certainly in the older days. But yes, I think, across the board, obviously there's a certain cynicism that exists, and we talk about whether you use show business and glamour because there are attractive people thrown into proximity, there is sparks fly, things happen in situations like that. Of course, there's loads of temptation, there's loads of opportunities to wander, and that sort of debauchery that exists. And I think it's also a function of how many people see fidelity as being vital to a marriage. I mean, I certainly do, but that I'm clearly not in the majority as I understand it. So there are various ways of looking at it, and I think Bollywood and high society is just an extension of, I think it happens in the lower strata of societies as well. I mean, we were talking yesterday about the Kambali Bai saying, "Abhi mere madad ko chhod diya," as you said, is